Hello. So this is going to be a short Dharma talk, so to speak, just kind of discussing the eight-limbed path of yoga outlined by Patanjali. So as you see, I have a few resources in front of me. I have kind of like the Bible of yoga here, the sutras. This version is Yoga Discipline of Freedom, the Yoga Sutras, attributed by Patanjali by Barbara Stoller-Miller. I also have The Heart of Yoga by T.K.V Desikachar. If I said that wrong, I apologize. Good book. A little bit from the Hatha Yoga Illustrated by Martin Kirk, Brooke Bruin, and Danielle Dituro. The Path of Yoga Sutras by Nicholai Bachman. And some inspiration from Meditation from the Mat by Rolf Gates. So I invite you to just kind of enter your learning space, find a comfortable seat, whatever that looks like to you. Just take a moment to really just arrive. So maybe you close your eyes and just take a few deep breaths. Already practicing one limb of the eight-limb path of Pratyahara, turning your senses inward, putting aside anything from your day, and truly bringing your full self to this time together. Maybe you imagine yourself sitting outside at my table with me. There's a chair for you. Several chairs. Imagine us together. Calling the yogic path, we all walk individually but amongst many. So take a moment to just feel that, to breathe. So when you're ready, you can keep your eyes open, and we'll start to discuss the eight-limb path by Patanjali. So the first two limbs we discussed previously in another video, the yamas and the niyamas. Again, very interesting that the eight-limb path starts with these. And when we think of this eight-limbed path, it's not necessarily a progression from one to the next, like stepping stones. They all kind of intermingle. But starting with the yamas and niyamas is a wonderful way to start our practice, or start the practice of yoga, because they really describe how we are in the world and also how we are with ourselves. So I'll just quickly review the yamas and niyamas. The yamas, we have ahimsa, non-harming, the blanket for all of yoga, non-harming. Then we have satya, truth. We have asteya, non-stealing, brahmacharya, moderation, and abhigara, non-hoarding or non-grasping, letting go. Typically, sometimes these are described a little bit more as the way we are in the world and moral restraints, but they can also be about how we also treat ourselves. And then the niyamas, a little bit more personal in terms of our personal self-care. We could actually think of them as our self-care practice. The first one, sosha, purity in body, mind, spirit. Then we have, let's see what comes next. We have, I know I'm missing one. Oh, of course, santosha, contentment, making peace with whatever is. And then the last 3 niyamas are tapas, burning enthusiasm, svadhyaya, self-study, and ishvara pranadhana, surrender to a higher purpose. So if you want to touch back and really dive deep into those, you can revisit the other video that I made specifically related to the yamas and niyamas. So after the yamas and niyamas, we have asana, the physical practice of yoga. And in, sometimes we call Western, Eastern, let's just say in Americanized yoga, sometimes this part or this limb of yoga is the only one. It's, can be a lot about the physical form as opposed to this really nice, holistic practice that Patanjali outlined. So why bring in the asana then? The movement. The asana, the aim of asana is to really reduce hyperactivity of the nervous system and prepare the body for pranayama and then deeper layers of meditation. So moving our body is really essential to clearing the mind, that whole mind-body connection. When we move our body, we can find stillness in the mind a little bit more, as well as bring numerous other health benefits to our bodies. So let's see, quote from Yoga Sutras 209. So in this talk, I'm going to do a lot of reading to you so you can really get comfortable. Imagine this is, your little story time. I find so much inspiration from other sources that I really wanted to include that. You can hit pause, you can write them down if you find anything really inspiring. So this is from The Path of the Yoga Sutras by Nicholai Bachman. And he says, the practice of asana purifies the body and clarifies the heart-mind. Our body is a sacred temple designed to make it possible for us to self-reflect and connect with a higher awareness within. When our limbs are supple, our breath is smooth, and no energy is blocked, we can relax and focus our attention inward, cultivating inner beauty and happiness. So we see the body is a very important part of yoga, but it's not the only part. Here's another one. Like a house protecting one from the heat of the sun, Hatha Yoga protects the practitioner. And that's from the Hatha Yoga Pradika. I really like that. A house protecting one from the heat of the sun, Hatha Yoga protects the practitioner. I think I'll pass on that whole thing, but and then I meant to read this one first, but we'll cycle back. Where did this all come from? The Yoga Sutras. So sometimes it's good to, just read what parts of the Yoga Sutras does Patanjali speak to each of the limbs. And we talked about the yamas and the niyamas in our last talk. So there's really only 3 lines in all of the sutras related to asana. The posture of yoga is steady and easy. It is realized by relaxing one's effort and resting like the cosmic serpent on the waters of infinity. Then one is unconstrained by opposite dualities. I'm going to read that to you again so you can really absorb it. The posture of yoga is steady and easy. It is realized by relaxing one's efforts and resting like the cosmic serpent on the waters of infinity. Then one is unconstrained by opposite dualities. I really like that. It's concise, just a couple of lines, basically telling us that, the posture doesn't need to be forced. It's about finding ease in the body as well as ease in the mind that translate together. So that's basically all that Patanjali says about the asana. So then we move on to pranayama. And again, pranayama is our specific breath work, as opposed to breath awareness, which we have throughout our practice. So, we might start our practice with ujjayi breathing and, focus on the breath throughout. But pranayama is a little bit more involved in that we're trying to increase our breath capacity a little bit and truly focus just on the breath. So throughout our practice, we work on breath awareness, turning inward, but true pranayama is typically done after the asana, because the asana is meant to, again, calm the nervous system, but then specifically open up different parts of the body. When we get to our physical practice, you'll see just that, opening laterally into the ribs, twisting can help open and provide more room for more breath. And pranayama, we'll talk on that more specifically, but again, it's steady and with ease, not forced. I'll read to you the lines from the sutras that speak on pranayama. And again, these are pretty simple. So it's called breath control here. When the posture of yoga is steady, then breath is controlled by regulation of the course of exhalation and inhalation. The modification of breath in exhalation, inhalation, and retention is perceptible as deep and shallow. Breathing regulated by where the breath is held, for how long, and for how many cycles. A fourth type of breath control goes beyond the range of exhalation and inhalation. Then the cover over the light of truth dissolves and the mind is fit for concentration. So again, it's very specific about our modulating our inhalation, our exhalation, our retention. A lot of times in that retention or pause, we can really feel into the stillness of our own true nature. And this fourth type of breath control goes beyond the range of exhalation and inhalation. And I think he's alluding more to, true stillness. Some of the Yoga Sutras really talk about yogic powers and how, some yogis can really suspend their breath for a prolonged amount of time. For our purposes, we're not trying to attain that, but I believe that's what he's alluding to there. So that's directly from the Yoga Sutras about pranayama. It's the bridge to subtler body awareness, subtler levels of awareness. Prana is sometimes equal to chi in Chinese medicine. This is responsible for the movement in the body, or the movement of energy in our body. So when we breathe deeply, we have this feeling like we're creating freedom, spaciousness, kind of removing anything that's really sticky or that needs to go. So again, this correlation between the limbs of yoga. So without pranayama or breath control, I really don't think the movement would be as meaningful, not nearly. So, and then the pranayama, the breath, is that bridge to the inner layers of yoga, so to speak, or the inner limbs. So pratyahara is the next level, and sometimes it's considered a side effect of pranayama, because we become so focused on the breath that our senses turn inward, which is what pratyahara means, sense withdrawal. And I really found when I was, writing this up, I found some interesting correlations between, I feel like there's so much correlation between the different wisdom traditions of the world, be it Buddhism, yoga, mindfulness. I feel like there's so many bridges and correlations. So when I was reading and reviewing pratyahara, it really brought me to mindfulness, and how mindfulness is just drawing the sensors in so we can do one thing on purpose with our full attention, which is what mindfulness is. And to me, that has a lot to do with pratyahara. So ahara means nourishment, and prat means against. So when you put them together, pratyahara means against nourishment. It doesn't mean that we're starving ourselves. It means that we're turning away from the senses. So prat, against, ahara, nourishment. So turning the senses down. I thought that was an interesting definition and way to look at pratyahara, because especially when I was reading through this book, The Heart of Yoga, he really talks about the 8-limb path, or 8 limbs of yoga, not being just on the mat. They're in our whole life. So this idea of sense withdrawal is that we can turn inward at any time. We can turn our senses out, away from the world when we need to, and turn them in towards ourselves. And I think in a general sense, us Americans, most humans, are an outwardly focused society. Hazard to say, the current situation that we're in could be encouraging us to be a little bit more of an inwardly focused society, or individually. It's just something that came to me just now. But if we're always striving to have our senses stimulated by the outside world, we forget our true nature of stillness. So, pratyahara. I've been in love with that word, just saying. But it happens naturally when we focus on our breath. And going back to that idea of sense withdrawal and against nourishment, another correlation, I think I found that in this book here, is that it can even help us, this sense withdrawal, a bit with regulating hunger or regulating our satiety. That we want to look for inward cues of when we are full, with food, with sensory stimulation, when we are full, and when, to stop eating or stop consuming. So, I have a little story for you here related to this. Page 331. Okay. And this is from Meditations from the Mat by Rolf Gates. And just take a deep breath, maybe close your eyes, close down your senses, and just see how this sits with you. See how this may or may not nourish you. Pratyahara is fascinating. It's a fascinating moment in this process. The juncture at which we go from distraction to direction. This is a turning point, an intersection of two planes of existence. My favorite example of pratyahara in daily practice or daily life is the first 2 days of vacation. You've already done the work, performed your tapas, you've cleared the time, made the arrangements, paid the bills. My experience of the first day or so of a vacation is the gradual process of letting go of my life at home and embracing the entirely new world of vacation. Initially, I'm still absorbed by some final interactions back home, some final detail. I'm usually tired and distracted. Then gradually, I shift focus. I begin to relax into the moment. This is the process of pratyahara, but instead of turning our attention towards a vacation, we turn our attention inward, towards the light. Dhyana is much simpler to understand. We'll get there. It is holding one's attention on the light. Dharana is the development and utilization of our power of concentration. Pratyahara and Dharana together make possible the acquisition of wisdom. Having let go of distraction and turned a focused mind inward, we can truly plumb the depths of our souls. We connect to our truths, to our true selves. In my own life, this was the point at which I began to live from my intuition. I began to cultivate and honor my own intuitive powers. I began to listen to the prompting of my heart. I began to value stillness and silence. My time on the mat went to a deeper place. We can start where we are by simply becoming aware of the process by which we arrive somewhere. Note the moment, the point where your experience departs from resistance and moves into understanding. Begin to witness how it is you gain wisdom from your actions. And I like how Rolf really describes pratyahara in a lot of the yogic process as, again, not something that specifically is going to happen just when you unroll your mat and you perform asana. It's about the way you live your life, the way you understand yourself. So he spoke of Dharana, moving us towards from pratyahara, turning the senses down, to Dharana, where we come to a one-pointed focus. So let's step back to the Yoga Sutras, and I'd like to read you the part about pratyahara Dharana. Okay, so pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses. When each sense organ serves contact with its object, withdrawal of the senses corresponds to the intrinsic form of thought. From this comes complete control of the senses. Pretty clear. And then this last paragraph I'm going to read from part 3 of the Yoga Sutras describes perfect discipline and the final limbs of yoga. So you'll see Dharana here. Concentration is binding thought in one place. Dhyana, meditation, is focusing on a single conceptual flow. Pure contemplation is meditation that illuminates the object alone, as if the subject were devoid of intrinsic form. Concentration, meditation, and pure contemplation, focus on a single object, constitute perfect discipline. The light of wisdom comes from mastery of perfect discipline. The practice of perfect discipline is achieved in stages. In contrast with the prior limbs of yoga, the final triad is internal within us. Yet it's only an external limb of seedless contemplation. So he's talking of that inward focus, moving towards a sense of oneness. So how can we come to a single pointed focus? Many ways. On the mat, we can use our breath. We can use our bodies. Again, this isn't just a continuous flow towards samadhi. We can practice dharana or complete focus on a certain part of our body, sensations in our body. We can focus on a place in our body, such as the chakras or what the chakras mean to us personally, a mantra, the heart center, the navel center, an inner light. Some people focus on an outside source, such as like candle gazing or a statue of a deity, something like that. Lots of doorways in. Those are just some examples. And it can be intermittent. Intermittent is more dharana, where we're continually coming back. And let's face it, that might be where we land for all of our meditative career. I'm being honest. You know, I've had pockets of dharana and samadhi, but it's that's not always the end goal. It can just be taking the time to try to quiet the mind in dharana and pratyahara. Let's see. Your heart of yoga. I have a good way to help you understand that in the heart of yoga here. So, coming back to that. Okay. So this speaks, again, of dharana, one-pointed focus. He says, the essential idea in the concept of dharana is holding a concentration or focused attention in one direction. Let me give you the example that is traditionally used to explain dharana. Imagine a large reservoir of water used by farmers for watering their fields. There are channels leading away from the reservoir in different directions. If the farmer has dug all the channels at the same depth, the water runs equally in all directions. But if one channel is deeper than the other, more water flows through it. This is what happens in dharana. We create the conditions. For the mind to focus its attention in one direction, instead of going out in many different directions. Deep concentration and contemplation can create the right conditions. And the focus on this one point that we have chosen becomes more intense. We encourage one particular activity of the mind, and the more intense it becomes, the more the other activities of the mind fall away. Dharana is therefore the condition in which the mind focuses and concentrates exclusively on one point. The point can be anything at all, but it is always just a single object. Dharana is one step away from dhyana, contemplation, or meditation. So when I was reading that, it reminded me of an author that I really respect her work. Her name is Lisa Wimberger, and she's from the Neurosculpting Institute. And she speaks of the same way of, going into that same groove with a slightly different context, but it's funny how your mind will bring you to different wisdom teachings when you start reflecting on some of this material. But she speaks of the idea of neurosculpting, in that we sometimes believe that our brains are kind of done developing after a certain age. Her idea is that a lot of that is because we've entrained and gone into these certain beliefs and patterns, and we keep going there. Kind of the way some people repeat the same relationship mistakes. They just, go back to what's comfortable, go back to that groove. Her idea is that we can retrain ourselves by reprogramming our brain to think a little differently, and we'll talk a lot more about that when we get into the nervous system and neuroscience a little bit. But basically, what she's speaking of is just going down that same path. So coming back to dhyana, and remember we can move into dharana in our asana practice, where we're just really focusing on our bodies, and we can also take it with us off of the mat too. So let's reflect a little bit more on dhyana from the Path of the Sutras, page 233. The clarification and stabilization of the heart-mind can result from dhyana. The more attention is focused, the fewer distractions occur, and the more the heart-mind becomes serene and composed. Eventually, our own heart-mind becomes immersed in the pure waters of meditation. It will no longer produce any negative behavioral patterns, samskaras, paving the way for us to become a kinder and more compassionate presence. I lingered on that samskaras because that goes back to that groove of just going into the same groove, basically watering the same seeds even if they're not going to be fruitful for us. And meditation can help us redirect ourselves away from those negative thought patterns, so to speak. Okay. As we become transfixed on our chosen object, we bolster our inner orientation and let go of outer distractions. And the final limb of yoga, samadhi, inches closer and closer. Dhyana is the centerpiece of turning inward and is necessary for connecting with our divine inner light of awareness. Another part that I like that takes us into the outer world, not just ourselves, is, again, Nicholai Bachman speaks on, as we concentrate on understanding others, we see their positive and negative aspects as nothing more than accumulation of their past experience. The more time we spend seeing their outer appearance as a temporary shell covering up their true nature, the closer we are to the last stage of turning inward, samadhi. If our chosen object is our heart, then we will realize the same holds true for ourselves and others. So again, that kind of cycles back to some of the work by Lisa Wimberger that we can kind of reprogram away from not just our own selves, but maybe how we view others. And that cycles all the way back to the beginning, yamas and niyamas. How we are in the world, how we treat ourselves in the world. So connections abound again and again when we really allow some of this material to sink into us. And this level of growth and transformation will never happen if we just have a strictly physical practice. So final words on samadhi. Letting go of the outer world. And it can happen every day. It's not this heightened sense of enlightenment that is reserved for gurus and people that meditate for years and years in caves. It can happen in moments of pure absorption in your own life when you're fully attending to one thing. We can have those glimpses inwards of samadhi. I really liked the definition of samadhi outlined in this book, Hatha Yoga Illustrated. So first, those last three really tie in together: dharana, dhyana, samadhi. Actually, sometimes they're tied into a certain branch of yoga called samyaya, I believe it's called. So I'll just give you his definitions of dharana: focus, concentration, with the body tempered by asana, the mind refined by the fire of pranayama, and the senses under control using pratyahara, the student reaches the 6th stage. Dhyana, the 7th stage, meditation, withdrawing the consciousness into the soul. Withdrawing the consciousness into the soul. And lastly, 8, samadhi, ecstasy, merging with the divine, self-realization. One experiences consciousness, truth, and unutterable joy. One must experience samadhi in order to understand it, because it is beyond the mind. And my teacher, Julie Ross, uses that expression a lot. It's beyond the mind. And that's, some of these feelings are very hard to put into words, to use words that are built by the mind. It's more of a feeling of turning inward, of bliss, pure connection. And again, sometimes we just have tiny little snippets of this during our meditation. Sometimes we have it out in nature, in interaction with other beings. It isn't one set, straight path. So, the 8-limb path, they inform each other. They inform our personal growth, our own individual personal growth. The beauty of it for me is that it's almost a timeless practice. The sutras were written, I believe it was before Christ, around the time that Christ was born. So these practices are not new. They're not a new model of behavior. They've been tested. They're timeless. And it's very individual. But yet, it's a path that many have taken before. So there is a roadmap, so to speak, but it has to be done alone. So I want to leave you with a quote from Rolf Gates. Let's see. And let me just say, as yoga teachers, we are helping to facilitate the Eightfold Path and educate. But again, many of these concepts, or some of these concepts, especially as you get further on the path, are beyond the mind. They can only be experienced. So after this video, I've created an experiential practice for us to move through a physical practice of asana, pranayama, and guiding into the last limbs of meditation. And you might choose to do that one first, and then listen to this after, whatever serves. So closing thoughts from Rolf Gates' Meditations from the Mat. In absorption, or samadhi, the witness or meditator is fully absorbed into the moment. There is an ecstatic experience of what I call the living moment. Our perspective is an unfolding, flowing continuum that is happening all by itself. And that's from a quote from Sridhar Jonathan Faust. And then Rolf goes on to talk about that. As our practice deepens and expands to encompass our entire lives, we find that we are accomplishing more and more and doing less and less. We learn to allow the same force that keeps our heart beating, digests our food, and maintains our health to guide us through our lives. As this process unfolds, our faith in it deepens. The love that brings peace becomes a living presence in our lives. Where once we thought and controlled, we now allow our minds to become spacious. We turn the results of our actions over to a loving universe. Our lives become an exploration in surrender. There's a new serenity in our hearts, and it shines through our eyes. We have come home. We are free. Rolf really eloquently helps us. I feel like he can put into words some of that is beyond the mind so beautifully. So let's just take a moment as we close our time together to once again find your seat. To sit tall. To breathe in the mystery. To breathe out any doubt. Breathe in the mystery. Breathe out fear. Breathe in and surround your being inside and out with this timeless practice. Simply take a moment to feel within you what is beyond words. And maybe you press the pause button and linger here in meditation. Or maybe it's time to move on with your day, but taking your yoga with you wherever you go. Namaste.